Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle real estate market update for February 2021. Before we get too far into this update, I want to just say it feels a lot like it did back in 2016, 2017, and the beginning of 2018. The Seattle housing market is crazy, and I know a lot of places around the country are experiencing very similar things, but in Seattle, we experienced this and have experienced this off and on for the last 5+ years. So as we jump into this update, keep in mind that we are in a super competitive market, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. As we jump into our market update here, I want to share a story just like I do in every single one of these updates. But rather than featuring one specific client, I want to just highlight and thank all of you here who've been following me on YouTube and following this channel and continuing to contribute to its success. Last month, 3 different people who've been following this channel were able to get into their new homes last month, and all of them did so virtually. So not only did we meet through YouTube, but we also were able to make that purchase happen through FaceTime and through Zoom. So if you're somebody who's out of the state and thinking about making a purchase, I know there's some of you watching right now. I'd love to connect. I'd love to get a conversation started. Now, let's jump into the Seattle housing market stats. And as I mentioned earlier, we're in an extremely hot housing market again. And it feels a lot like it did in 2016 as we started to head into this 2+ year period of being the hottest housing market in the entire US. And right now we're trailing Phoenix metro area, but we're starting to pick up and ramp up a lot like we did back in 2016. So I don't want to predict right now that we're going to see 2.5 years of crazy growth like we did a few years back, but it's starting to feel like it did. And that's the only comparison I'll make. As we look at the median sales price in the city of Seattle, we saw an 8.3% growth year over year and just slightly over December's numbers. And we came in at $780,000 for the median sales price in the city of Seattle. Something to note about the median sales price and prices in general, I mentioned that this market's starting to feel a lot like it did back in 2016, 17, and beginning of 18 when it was super hot. And what we saw in all of those years, and typically, historically, is we see prices start to climb and plateau and slightly decline after the summer kicks off. So we see this push typically all the way until early midsummer, and then we start to see prices level off or decline a little bit. Even in the hottest housing market we were experiencing, we did see a little bit of a let off the gas, and people were able to get houses a little closer to asking price. Now, they weren't getting them below asking price, but closer to asking price. In those years though, we were seeing houses selling 7-8% over asking price in the peak selling season, April, May, June. So this year, I'm thinking that we might start to see prices jumping at those rates. And we're already seeing lots of houses selling well over asking price, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000, depending on the price point. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw prices start to jump and to sell even more above asking price than they already are selling. Speaking of selling above asking price, the average house in Seattle last month sold 1.5% above asking price. And that's actually not a lot when you think about how many houses sold in the city. And when you think about all the crazy multiple offer situations, maybe you've heard and I'm even experiencing and talking about. And the truth is, Seattle itself is not experiencing as much of the craziness as the surrounding suburbs. And some of the suburbs surrounding Seattle are seeing 4, 5, 6% over asking price. So they're seeing this competition level that's starting to heat up. We are seeing it in Seattle, but on a little bit smaller scale. Last month also saw a substantial jump in new homes coming to the market, which is completely normal for January following a December holiday season. Although last month in December, we saw about 50% more new listings than we normally do during the holidays. And then we added that jump onto January, and we're seeing a considerably larger amount of new houses on the market in January as well. And for perspective, we're up almost 40% year over year in new listings in Seattle. And in 2019, we did see numbers closer to this year, but we still saw a substantially larger amount of new houses coming on the market this year than we did at the same time last year. One would think that as a result, we would see an increase in the supply and a amount of homes that are on the market and out there, but we saw the opposite. We actually saw a decline in the amount of houses that are on the market. And that's because we're seeing a lot of buyer activity in the market. Lots and lots of buyers out there. So even though a lot of new homes came on the market, they were all getting gobbled up. And what that means is that we are still seeing super, super tight inventory levels. And last year, we were right about 0.8 months of supply of homes on the market, which is not abnormal for this market. And we were at the same level this month, 0.8 months of supply that we saw last year. Now, some markets around the country are experiencing this maybe for the first time or on a rare occasion. Right now, they're starting to experience this and they don't normally experience this. For people in Seattle and people that have been in this housing market, we experience this on a regular basis, so it's a little less jarring. But at the same time, we're seeing very few houses on the market compared to the amount of buyers. What that means is the market's super, super competitive and definitely favoring the sellers. Now, previously, I mentioned that the Seattle housing market itself isn't quite as hot as the suburbs. And as we look at median days on market, we see this truth played out as well. And we see about 15 days is the median amount of time for a house in Seattle to be on the market versus 8 days on the market in Shoreline, 5 days on the market in Linwood, and 6 days on the market in Edmonds. And all those are in Snohomish County, which is just north of King County, which Seattle, Bellevue, Kirkland, all those cities are in. And it's the county that a lot of people have been flocking to. As well, people have been flocking down towards Pierce County in the south. So what does all of this information mean? We just went through a lot of housing market stats and we talked about how competitive the Seattle housing market is. But if you're somebody who's thinking about selling a house, this means that you have a lot of negotiation power. And if you price your house right, you're likely going to see multiple offers on your house and potentially see the price go up. Now, there's never any guarantees of that, but most likely your house is going to sell pretty quickly and it's going to sell for more than your asking price, and you're most likely going to get more favorable terms. In a previous video that I published a couple weeks back, I talked about how this might be so far the best time to sell your house in Seattle or the surrounding suburbs. Now, that's assuming that you want to get something different or you're planning to move out of the area. If you're not, there's not much motivation to sell. But if you are planning to relocate or move somewhere else, you might find that this is a good time to get your house on the market and capitalize on some of the craziness. On the flip side, if you're a home buyer, it's a competitive market. And what that means is you're competing with other buyers for the same houses. There aren't a lot of houses on the market. The inventory is the technical term. Supply is low. So that means that you are most likely going to pay above the asking price for a house, and you're most likely going to be making your offer more favorable to the seller versus more favorable to you. So what that looks like is you're probably adjusting some of the terms in the contract to make your offer more appealing to the seller, and you may be removing contingencies as well. Does this mean, though, that as a buyer that you shouldn't buy a house right now? I've had people ask me that. Should I wait to buy a house till the fall? Should I wait to buy a house until next year or 2 years from now? And I don't have a crystal ball. And in these videos, you find that I talk about the stats and I talk about what's going on right now. And I'll make brief predictions into the future, maybe a couple months down the line. But it's really, really, really hard to predict what's going to happen. And last year was a great case in point of that fact. We had a global pandemic. It's hard to predict what's going to happen. We had no clue that was going to happen. The Seattle housing market was starting to pick up steam heading into the late winter and early spring, and then all of a sudden, everything slowed down. People didn't put their houses on the market. People weren't buying houses. But then all of a sudden, we saw interest rates drop, and we saw people starting to put their house on the market. We started seeing people buying houses, and then we ended the year in this frenzy and headed into 2021 with a full head of steam. Now, could we have predicted that last year? No way. So as we think about buying, as we think about selling, we want to think about the more immediate. Can I buy a house right now? Can I afford to buy a house right now? What are my goals? Do I plan to live in this house for 5 to 7 years? Do I plan to stay here for a while, or am I thinking about moving in a year or two? And all of those things play into whether it makes sense to buy a house versus renting a house. And so if you're somebody who's thinking about buying a house, I'd love to have that conversation with you and talk about your goals and walk through that with you. Thank you so much for watching my February 2021 Seattle housing market update. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I know you got a lot of value out of it. So I'm gonna ask you to do 2 things. First off, please give this video a thumbs up, like this video, and maybe drop a comment down below to help boost the algorithm so more people can see it. And secondly, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so that you can see other market updates like this and other real estate videos that you might find helpful as well.